that I thought may, you know, be able to do it during the day. So we'll see. Try to expand the group a little bit.
Mhm.
All right, so it is 12 o'clock. I'm going to read this big book workshop format. Oh, let me share my screen. Where are we here? Oh, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Sweet. Okay. Oh, Tim, we have another one. Hi, Tim. Make sure I admitted him. Is this working? Okay. All right. So, hello, my name is Jessica, and I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to the Big Book Workshop. We as leaders do not consider ourselves to be the gurus of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. We do not consider ourselves to be experts in anything at all. For those who care to, please join me in a moment of silence to remind us why we are here and for the alcoholic who still suffers. And please join me in the workshop prayer. God, let me set aside everything I think I know about you, AA, myself, and my disease for an open mind and a new experience. Let me be honest and thorough. Amen. For the first couple of weeks, we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves in order to get to know one another. My name is Jessica, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Jessica. Hi, I'm Jen. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Jen. Is Tim still there? I don't know why this isn't like going full screen for me. What is going on? Okay. Well, Tim, if you're there, hi. This is Jen. Jen, this is Tim. Okay. So the purpose of this workshop is to experience the recovery process as outlined in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, either for the first time or again, so that we may better carry out and understand our primary purpose, which is to stay sober and to carry the message to the still suffering alcoholic. We are here to talk about recovery only and go through the 12-step processes outlined in the Big Book. This is not an emotional or intellectual exercise. It is a spiritual exercise so that we can all recover and experience the recovery process as we read it together. It is recommended that anything you hear here that cannot be reconciled in the Big Book, 12 and 12, or AA-approved literature be simply ignored. This is a non-crosstalk workshop. Okay, so it looks like we are on week 6 this week. So I'm going to pull up that document here. Oops. Bear with me. All right, there we are. Just bear with me one second. I'm having like a Zoom. I don't know if it's me or if I'm just trying to get this full screen. There we go. Just want to make sure no one else wanted to get admitted to this. Okay, I'm still getting used to like toggling between these screens and stuff.
What
Okay.
page is?
So we are on page 80.
Okay.
Right. There's Tim. Okay, Tim, since you're new, we are doing a big book workshop. I don't know if you know about the big book speakers, Joe and Charlie. They have a 19-week big book workshop. They have this book on Amazon. If you do, I don't know why it's like cutting out. It's $10 on Amazon. But for those that don't have it, I just pull up the PDF every week. So we are on week 6 and we are on chapter 4, we agnostics. We usually have a big book with us, and if you want to follow along, otherwise we just kind of take turns reading. So I'm going to start us off here. It wants us to read pages 44, paragraph 1. So chapter 4, we agnostics. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope you have made the clear distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. One If you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount of you take, you are probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. And it says to continue to paragraph 3, but it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were of exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life, or else. Perhaps it's going to be that way with you. But cheer up, something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Our experience will show you that need not to be disconcerted. So, in the first paragraph, Bill asks us 2 questions. When you honestly want to, where did I go here? Hold on. Wrong page. When you honestly want to, is it true you cannot quit entirely? That is the obsession. When drinking, do you have little control over the amount you take? That is the allergy. If your honest answer to each of both of these questions is yes, then you're probably alcoholic. We need not to ask ourselves, sorry, Jen, this was page 72. A little disoriented here. If you answered yes to both of these, you're probably alcoholic. And we need to not ask ourselves anything more than those 2 questions to determine whether or not we are alcoholic. Some people, like me, tend to overcomplicate things. Our fellowship today has taken 2 simple questions and first expanded them to 10 questions, then 20, then finally turned into a pamphlet, which now has 44 questions. Thank God Ebby didn't have the 44 questions when he went into Bill's kitchen. Imagine Bill sitting there drunk. Has he been drinking for 3 or 4 weeks straight? Now imagine if Ebby had asked, Bill, has alcohol been bothering your reputation? Hell, he hadn't had a reputation in years. Or if Bill had Ebby had asked, has alcohol been interfering with your sex life? He hadn't had any of that in years either. One of the 44 questions asked, do you drink alone? Well, think about it. If I'm buying, the answer is yes. And if you're buying, then no. We had an old friend that used to live in Tyler, Texas. His name was Wino Joe. I always felt sorry for everybody in AA that didn't get to meet Wino Joe. He was a real character. He's dead now, but Wino Joe had made up his own list to ask yourself if you're an alcoholic. The first question on his list was, has the roof of your mouth ever been sunburned while drinking? He said, if it has, you're probably alcoholic. I think the second question was, have you ever been arrested for drunk driving from the back seat of somebody else's car? The third one I loved was, have you ever been arrested for public drunkenness while in jail? He had a big list of them. We need only 2 questions Bill gave us. I use them all the time. People came to me to ask, do you think I might be alcoholic? I say, I have no idea. Let me ask you a few questions. Have you been able to quit drinking left on your own resources? If they are a real alcoholic, you have to say no. Then I ask, do you have any control over the amount you take after you've started drinking? If they're a real alcoholic, they've got to say no. And then I say, well, you're probably an alcoholic. That's about as simple as you can make it. Now, if that's your case too, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience can conquer. We are a very unique people. We are the few people in the world that have an illness of the mind and the body that can only be overcome by a spiritual experience. We realize that we are the only people in the world that has an illness that is a terminal illness, and we can come out of it in better shape than when we went into it. The third paragraph has 2 words that need to be defined: atheist and agnostic. Atheist, one who says God does not exist. If a person really believes that, there is no power on earth for him greater than human power. The only power that he can depend on is his own mind. He can't really trust other people. Since there is no God, he must run his own show, affect his own destiny, and make his own decisions. Are you an atheist? Agnostic, one who believes God exists, but you cannot prove it. He acts as though God does not exist. He runs his own show, affects his own decisions, stands on his own 2 feet, and rules his destiny. In other words, he acts exactly like the atheist, but he believes that God exists. Are you agnostic? And I will pass.
Hi, I'm Jen. I'm alcoholic.
Hi, Jen.
For either case, atheist or agnostic, we're going to have to find some way to have this spiritual experience and to use this power greater than human power. For many of us, that seems to be an impossible task. Let's see how we make that transition. How do I get from the state to state of being a true believer? A true believer is one who believes in God and acts as if he does. He doesn't stand on his own 2 feet. He doesn't run his own show and doesn't rule his own destiny. He turns to God for help and gets the guidance and the strength and the power he needs. He believes that God does exist. Even the atheist will admit that there is such a thing as evolution, and if evolution isn't evidence of some power greater than human power, I don't know what is. I think most of us are agnostic when we get to AA. We believe in God, but we don't turn to God for help and direction. We run our own show, and we get the same result as the atheist. Turning to page 44, paragraph 4. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral, we could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. Obviously, but where and how were we to find this power? Page 45, paragraph 2. Oh, I just read that. I've never met an alcoholic yet who didn't have a code of morals or a philosophy for life. We know that we should do, and we know what we shouldn't do. We know how we should live, and we know how we shouldn't live. But our problem is because of our alcoholism, we are unable to live up to these codes, these philosophies, and these morals. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. You know, if we weren't powerless, we wouldn't be here, would we? It goes on to say, its main objective is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. It doesn't say which will help you solve it. It says the main objective is to enable you to find the power greater than yourselves, and then that power will solve the problem. Interestingly enough, from this point on, we are through talking about alcohol. From page 45 on, we will talk about one thing and one thing only, how we can find this power. And if we can find the power, then the power will solve the problem. We know that for every one of us, the main problem is a lack of power. We were driven here under the lash of alcoholism. We came here because we are powerless over alcohol. If we're powerless, we lack the power, and then the obvious answer is power, and the question is whether you're atheist or agnostic or not. How do you find the power? Surely we're not true believers, because if we were, we would have had that power before we came to AA. However, we can get this power and apply it to our lives in order to overcome our disease. Now, if we're atheist or agnostic, maybe we can change to a true believer and find that power, and then that power will solve our problem. The rest of the chapter is devoted to how do you find that power. The whole rest of the book is devoted to that one subject. It is a very simple procedure, and it starts over on page 47. Page 45, paragraph 3. We know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice or old ideas. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him with which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. Perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. We were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon a power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. Go to page 47. Paragraph 2. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. So, the wonderfully effective spiritual structure we're building is the spiritual experience or the spiritual awakening. The foundation of that structure was step 1, which is willingness. Bill also tells us the cornerstone of that structure is step 2, believing. Bill tells us that the cornerstone is to believe or to be willing to believe that there is power greater than human power. This is the beginning. Bill calls this the cornerstone. Remember when we took step 1 that was willingness to change. Once you see that you're powerless over alcohol and your life has become unmanageable and that this isn't going to work, then you become willing to change. And I pass.
Tim, did you want to read on the screen or did you want us to read? I don't know how well you can see it. Oh. I think he's muted. Okay, I'll continue to read for now. That's the foundation. Once the foundation is laid, on that foundation we can lay a cornerstone. After you become willing to change, then you have to believe that you can change. Step 2 is the cornerstone. All we have to do is start off in this program is to believe or become willing to believe. So we have 2 parts of the wonderfully effective spiritual structure in place if we can say yes, we believe, or yes, we are willing to believe. Notice the asterisk at the bottom of the page. Please be sure to read Appendix 2 about the spiritual experience. If this is the 3rd time we have been referred to Appendix 2 spiritual experience, the wonderfully effective spiritual structure is the vital spiritual experience. We are going to see a progress through the steps that we are building, that spiritual experience or that spiritual structure. We have already put 2 of the stones in place, so we are already building the structure as we are going through the book, chapter by chapter. Read 47, paragraph 3. That was great news to us, for we had assumed we could not make use of spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith which seemed difficult to believe. When people presented us with a spiritual approaches, how differently did we all say, I wish I had what that man has. I'm sure it would work if I could only believe as he believes, but I cannot accept as surely true the many articles of faith which are so plain to him. So it was comforting to learn that we could commence at a simpler level. And then page 48, the top paragraph. We often found ourselves handicapped by the obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning prejudice, old prejudice or old beliefs. Many of us had been so touchy that even casual reference to the spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism. This sort of thinking had to be abandoned. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we had tried to on other questions. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. Sometimes this was a tedious process. We hope no one else will be as prejudiced for as long as some of us were. So, all you have to do to start out is to believe. Believing comes before you do something, and faith comes after you believe and then take the action. Today, how can you not believe that there must be some power working within the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous? When you first come in here, you don't know what to be true, but you can believe it. And if you stay with us long enough and work the program and have a spiritual experience, then you'll know it. And that is faith. But faith without works is dead. I guess I'm going to share on that a little bit too. Yeah, the word believe definitely is having having faith in something without actual proof, and knowing is having the actual proof. When I was listening to the Joe and Charlie tapes, they were saying, like, let's say your car needs to get fixed. You ask a friend that's lived in town longer. You have faith in them that they're going to recommend you to a good place, and they said the guy will give you a reasonable price and fix it. And you bring it there, the guy gives you a reasonable price and he fixes it. So now and you believe that, and that is true. So when you come in on step 2, they're not saying we came to know a higher power. We're just saying we came to believe. There's no actual proof yet, which there may be, but like after working the steps, it says as a result of these steps, we'll have the spiritual experience. So I can say for a fact, I know God is true in my life because he has worked in my life and the promises come true. But at the beginning, it's very true. Sometimes you don't know it yet, but stay along around enough, like they said, and work the program. Continuing on page 48, paragraph 1, the readers still may ask why he should believe in a power greater than himself. We think there are good reasons. Let's have a look at some of them. Then it goes to 51, paragraph 1. Uh, Once confused and baffled by the seemingly futility of existence, they show the underlying reasons why they're making heavy going of life. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell us why living was so unsatisfactory. They show us the change that came over them. When hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness and presence of God today is the most important fact of their life, they present a powerful reason why one should have faith. So the reason we have everything we have today is because it's been developed within the last century. Students of the ancient history tell us that the intellect of men in those days was equal to the best of today. I used to think we invented this stuff because we were smarter, but we really aren't. People who lived thousands of years ago were just as smart as we are today. Yet in ancient times, material progress was painfully slow. Very little of this stuff was developed years ago. Thousands of years, even 500 years ago, you were not allowed to believe differently. You couldn't believe anything differently because of superstition, tradition, and fixed ideas. They kept you from believing differently and you couldn't change anything. It's only in the last 100 years that our minds have been freed in the realm of material to believe differently. The reason we went to the moon is because someone believed we could do that. And the same reason we have microwaves, cars, and television. I think the story of Columbus is one of the greatest examples of what you can do when you are willing to change your belief. Some 500 years ago, when they called the civilized world, was situated around the shores of the Mediterranean Sea and the western shores of Europe. They had found a good place called the East Indies. In the East Indies, you could get gold, silk, and spices, lots of goody goodies, but it took literally years to get to the East Indies. They were trying to find a new trade route to the East Indies, and someone asked, is there a possibility that we can sail a ship there? The answer was, no, dummy. Don't you know that you can only sail as far as the northeast end of the Mediterranean Sea, and then you have to go by land? Camelback, horseback, footback, however they traveled, that took years to complete. Well, what would happen if we sailed the other direction? And then they said, well, idiot, don't you know if you sail that way, you're going to fall off the edge of the earth? In those days, everyone thought the world was flat, and if you sailed out there too far to the west, you'd sail off the edge of the earth. I don't know why they believe that, but I'm sure it was because some people who sailed out there didn't come back, and they just thought they had sailed off the edge. Wouldn't it be great if the world was flat? We could just take all this environmental junk and trash out here and just go push it off the edge and be done with it all. I will pass. Sorry, I keep up with that.
Jen, I'm still alcoholic. Now here's Columbus, and we believe that Columbus had to be an alcoholic because if you're going to believe differently than the entire world and everybody in it, and you're going to stand there and express that belief, you're going to have to be tougher than hell to do it. Many times, if you express a belief different than what everybody else believes, they would burn you at the stake or hang you from a tree or cut your head off or something. But Columbus was tough enough and bullheaded enough to be able to stand there and say, I believe that the world is round. I do not believe it's flat. Then he made one of the most drunken statements the world has ever heard. He said, I believe we can get to the east by sailing west. Now, if that isn't drunk thinking, I don't know what is. Many of us have his mannerisms. Columbus was an alcoholic. He He didn't know where he was going. When he got there, he didn't know where he was. When he got back, he didn't even know where he had been. But what really made him an alcoholic was a woman financed the whole trip for him twice. A little formula that the world has always known and used. To change anything at all, there are certain things that have to take place. The first thing you have to do in order to change anything is to be willing to change. Circumstances are what make us willing. Trying to find the new trade route to the East Indies is what made Columbus willing to change. The second thing you have to do to change anything is to believe you can. Columbus said, I believe that the world is round, not flat, and I believe you can get to the east by sailing west. But his belief wasn't enough because he was still standing on the shore of the ocean the day he expressed that belief. Some days, weeks, months, years later, he did the third thing. He made a decision. He said, by golly, I'm going to find out whether this thing is round or flat. Can you really get to the east by sailing west? But his decision wasn't enough either, because he was still standing on the shore of the ocean the day he made that decision. Some days, weeks, months, years later, he did the fourth thing you have to do. He started taking action. The first thing Columbus did is he went to the King of Portugal to get the money. But the King of Portugal, being a very astute businessman, said, there's no way I'm going to let you have this money because you'll sail out there and sail right off the edge of this sucker and I'll lose it all. He didn't give up and then went to see the Queen of Spain. Columbus sweet talked her and promised that he would bring back gold, silk, spices, and the goody goodies of life. She gave him the money. He bought 3 ships, hired crew members, and loaded those ships with provisions for the trip. Then they set sail and began to go east by sailing west. Sailing west day after day after day. Now we don't know for sure, but we have a suspicion that on that first trip, he hired a special sailor and put him on the bow of the lead ship at night with a lantern and whispered in his ear, I believe this thing is round, but if you see the edge of this damn thing, you holler so we can get turned around in time. Now, after sailing due west for several days, they got results. They found land on the other side, which was the result of the action they had taken. Columbus thought it was the East Indies. It wasn't. It was the West Indies. But he had proven to himself that the world is not flat. It is round, and you won't sail off the edge of it. He turned around and went back to Europe, right back to the Queen of Spain, and she asked Columbus, where's the gold, silk, and spices you promised you would bring me? He said, sweetheart, I'm sorry, but I didn't find any. Tell you what I'll do. If you will refinance me, I'll go back. Trust me, honey. Please. This time I'll find it. She refinanced him and he got some more ships, more provisions, more crew members, and began to go east by sailing west with one big difference. The second trip, he didn't hire the lookout and put him on the bow of the lead ship at night. This time he went back on faith. He went back on knowledge. The first time he went on belief. And I'll pass.
Tim, would you like to read or do you want me to keep reading? Keep reading? Okay. So you can't start with faith. The only things you can do are start with a belief. Step 2, make the decision. Step 3, take the action. Steps 4 through 11, and get the results when you have faith. I would love to sit here and tell you today that the 12 steps of AA are brand new and that the world has never seen anything like them before. But if I did, I'd be telling you a lie, because the 12 steps are based on the same identical formula that Columbus and any other human being has ever used to change anything. The first thing we have to do in order to recover from alcoholism is be willing to change. And that's what step 1 gives us, the willingness. As soon as you see that what we are doing is no longer going to work, then we are willing to change. The second thing we have to do is believe that we can do it. That's step 2. But that belief will do us no good unless we make a decision about it. That's step 3. However, that decision will do us no good unless we take the action. And those are steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. The result of the actions are that will get results, just as it says in the first part of step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. Now we have faith. Now we have knowledge. We are no longer just believing. You see, I don't just believe that God will restore me to sanity. Having worked the steps, I know that he will because he has done so, the first part of step 12. Those of us who have been restored to sanity now have faith, can now help the next newcomer to believe, which is step 2, make the decision, step 3, and take them by the hand and walk them through the action steps, steps 4 through 11. And they will get results, have a spiritual awakening, and they will know the first part of step 12. And they can go help the next newcomer to believe, the second part of step 12. There's only one thing we can't do for the newcomer, and that is we cannot make them willing. That is a job that they have to work on themselves. How does an alcoholic become willing to change? This is very simple. Drink lots of alcohol. I have hear people come to AA and say they've been working on step 1 for 3 years in AA, and I said, "No, you haven't. You don't work on step 1, willingness in AA. You work on step 1 out there. And when you have drunk enough, when you just can't stand it any longer, then you become willing to change. Then we can begin to help you by helping you come to believe, decide, act, and have the spiritual awakening." And it's the same formula that the world has always used to change the status of anything. Now, if I know I need the power, and I know the beginning of the finding of the power is just to believe, I know the procedure, the formula to find the power. I only need to know one more thing. Where am I going to find that power? And I will pass.
Jen, alcoholic,
Hi, Jen.
page 51, paragraph 2. We asked ourselves this: are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as were the ancients about the realm of the material? Even in the present century, American newspapers were afraid to print an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight at Kitty Hawk. Had not all efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds had proven man could never fly? Had not people said God had reserved this privilege to the birds? Only 30 years later, the conquest of the air was almost an old story, and airplane travel was in full swing. Again, we see another illustration of the power of believing and how this power is used. There are other illustrations throughout the book. Bill talks about electricity. Electricity is a power greater than us. We can harness it. We know how to generate electricity, but we don't know that much about it. They say it's a force of undetermined origin. We don't really know where the electricity comes from or where it begins. I think this is like the power we've received from God. Like great powers and all the powers in our universe, we don't know where they exist, but we don't have to know about them to use them. Bill talks about the Wright brothers. How can a bicycle mechanic believe he can build an airplane? But they did believe. The Wright brothers went out and they believed, and they made a decision, and they took the thing out, and a lot of times they crashed, but they didn't stop. If you fail, if you believe and you make a decision and you fail, it's real simple. All you have to do is change what you believe. Change your decision and you'll finally get it right. And that's what they did. And finally, they got the thing to fly. We are the only ones that can allow limitations in our lives. Whatever we believe, we become. So be careful if you believe some bad stuff. You'd better watch it because it's going to be a part of your life. If we want to change bad beliefs to good beliefs, we will have to change our minds and begin to believe differently. This is what we read in the spiritual experience on page 567. I think this little story about the Wright brothers was put in there to show us that most of us were agnostic. Since most of us believed in God but couldn't prove it, we had to take our chance. That little story shows us that proof is not always right. I found in my life that any power greater than human power can't really be proven one way or another. Only the results of our actions will prove it. God is the same way. I don't have to understand God, and you don't have to prove it to me to be able to find the power. Now, if I need the power, I know the beginning is the belief. And if I know the formula to find it, the only thing left I have to know is where that power is. My book is complete. It gives me everything I need to have. On page 55, it tells me where to find that power. Page 55, paragraph 1. Yet we had been seeing another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from this world. People who rose above their problems. They said God made these things possible, and we only smiled. We'd seen spiritual release, but liked to tell ourselves it wasn't true. I think the big book is telling me that God dwells within me. Oh, actually, it says for me to read page 57 also. Okay. Save for a few brief moments of temptation, the thought of drink has never returned, and at such times a great revulsion has risen up in him. Seemingly he could not drink even if he would. God had restored his sanity. What is this but a miracle of healing? Yet its elements are simple. Circumstances made him willing to believe. He humbly offered himself to his maker. Then he knew. Even so has God restored us all to our right minds or sanity. To this man, the revelation was sudden. Some of us grow into it more slowly, but he has come to all who have honestly sought him. When we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. So I think the big book is telling me that God dwells within me. I think today that every man, woman, and child on the face of the earth has some form of knowledge inside of themselves, and that form of knowledge seems to be able to tell us what we should do and what we should not do. It seems to be able to tell us the difference between right and wrong. It seems to be able to tell us how we should and should not live. What most of us have done in our chase for money, power, prestige, and sex is we have disregarded that knowledge, pushed it inside ourselves, and obscured it. And I will pass.
But now we begin to operate on a conscious knowledge of the mind to satisfy our wants, needs, and desires. I think some people want to call that knowledge common sense. Others might want to refer to it as conscience, and surely some would call it the soul. Still, others call it innate intelligence. I don't really feel it makes much difference what we call it, as long as we recognize the fact that it's there. I've had my evidence of this in my life, and you have too. Sometimes was getting ready to do something, and some voice from somewhere would say to me, "I don't think you ought to do that," and I wouldn't pay attention to it. I'd go right ahead and do it. And then I'd get into a hell of a shape. And then that same voice would say, "See, I told you not to do it." It's just been a part of me all of my life. Have you ever gazed up at the stars at night and wondered to yourself, could I have made all of this? Have you ever looked inside a medical textbook and realized how intricate the mechanical workings of the human body were? Yes, I have. I'm studying anatomy right now. It's awful. And how complex and synergistic everything to the smallest atom was. Each is having a purpose within itself and within a greater whole. Have you ever thought to yourself that no human could have made this, and that there must be something at work here, so incredibly powerful, intelligent, and miraculous, to have been create such a complex synergism throughout all the world, throughout all of the world, natural world, and not to mention the universe? Remember in the appendix 2 where it talked about tapping into an unsuspected inner resource of strength that we might want to identify with a power greater than ourselves, or God as you understand him. If God dwells within me, and I believe he does, then he dwells within you. It also means that we can have a spirit, or we can have a personal God. I don't have to worry anymore whether it's hellfire, damnation, or brimstone. If he dwells within me, then he's my own personal God. This has given me a completely new concept of God, as I understand him. And it's changed my understanding of God from hellfire and brimstone to an entirely different kind of God. It's given me a simple little procedure that if I will follow it, I will be able to find that power and I don't have to know anything. All I have to do is believe, decide, and act. And then I'll get results. Then I can go back and help the next person to come to believe. I don't believe we could make our decision without this chapter. Most spiritual things you will read to prove to God to you. This chapter doesn't do that. It gives you a procedure that if you will follow it, God will prove himself as a result of what you're going to get from the following procedure. This is some of the greatest information I have ever learned. I can have my own personal God. He dwells within me. My knowledge comes from and through him, and I'll be able to find that power. Am I ready to make a decision? You bet. When he was a God of justice, when he was hellfire and brimstone, I wasn't ready to make that decision. But throughout this chapter, my concept of God has changed entirely. I'm beginning to believe that he might be a kind and loving God, and just maybe he will start doing some good things for me, not hellfire and brimstone. Now I'm ready to make a decision. I don't think it was by accident that the very next chapter is titled How It Works. Now, Bill sits down and he writes down the chapter, How It Works, which contains some of the best spiritual information the world has ever seen. It's a little formula and a set of proposals. Bill called them the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, each week, Tim in this book, it has some homework assignments. Basically, they're for you to do on your own or with your sponsor. We don't go over them in the next meeting next week, but they suggest that you do this right after the meeting if that's something that you want to do. So we will just continue here. So I will pass.
Dr. Carl Jung told Roland Hazard about ideas, emotions, and attitudes. That's what we're going to be looking at now. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were the guiding force of the lives of these people, are suddenly cast to one side. Most certainly, the ideas, emotions, and attitudes that I had toward God were that of a child. I couldn't accept it then. I couldn't accept it later. I couldn't accept it when I got here, and I can't accept it today because I need new ideas and emotions and attitudes about this. I need new information. We agnostics, let's break down the title so we can understand it better. Just the word agnostic means something to me. The root of the word gnostic means knowledge. The first part, ag, means without. Put the ag in front of the agnostic or without knowledge. Therefore, we agnostic means those of us who are without knowledge. That's me, right? And the knowledge that I have wasn't good. Bill had the same experiences that we did. When Evie presented him with the solution, he was aghast. Some of us are aghast at the solution also. Bill said, when they talked of a God personal to me, my mind became irritated and my mind snapped shut against these theories. And certainly that's the way many of us reacted. Later on in the big book, it tells us that when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. The spiritual malady. The understanding of God of my understanding. When this is straightened out, we will straighten out mentally and physically. The chapter, We Agnostics, is an attempt to do that. Can you hear that background? Should I?
Oh, it's fine.
Okay.
It's not disruptive.
Chapter Agnostics is an attempt to do that. Father Bill Wilson said, some of you know Father Bill said this to us many, many times, and I love it. He said that this chapter is not put here to teach me that there is any particular type of religion or type of God. Bill said this chapter is simply put here so that I might read, question, and wonder, to get some ideas, emotions, and attitudes, some new ones, and to open up my mind to the point that God might prove to me there is a God. Now, with that understanding, this chapter makes more sense to me and becomes extremely valuable in my life. Read page 44, paragraph. Yeah, I think this is kind of like a different style of reviewing it because we noticed we were reading the same
Yeah.
paragraph Over.
Yeah, we've already read this.
This says Joe and Charlie transcript on the top.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like a, yeah. You you want me to read that again?
No. Oh, you're right. Interesting.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, I think moving forward the next couple of pages, it is because it didn't say the Joe and Charlie before.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think maybe let's just read uh without like the big book inserts because I think it's just going over it again and like what they're saying about it.
Okay, I'll just finish this page then.
Okay.
Let's let's look closer at the first paragraph. In the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. We hope you've made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely because of the obsession, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take because of the allergy, you are probably alcoholic. Isn't that simple? But people like to expand on things. They took the two questions out of the big book, and some years later, they made a little pamphlet that had 10 questions in it. But that wasn't enough. They made another one that had 20 questions in it. I think we're up to 44 questions today. Thank God that Evie didn't have those 44 questions with him when he walked into Bill's kitchen. He would have said, Bill, has alcohol been, yeah, we did this already.
Yeah, I honestly this study book is interesting. It does get a little redundant
Mhm.
because if we go to the next page here, we already talked about that old friend that used to live in Tyler, Texas. We talked about the God thing being disconcerned. Um, I guess does this looks like a little bit of new information, does it not, or no? No. One without knowledge of God, just belief.
Maybe we can just read it on our own and
Yeah,
see if anything new pops out at us.
yeah, because if we keep moving forward here, it's going back to more of a review from week 5. Remember, we kind of noticed that they go back and forth a little bit.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, this is
yes, because you read about the
page 18 is
cornerstone.
identical to what you read.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And
So
then if we go here, they're talking about Columbus again.
I
So,
mean,
yeah.
I know I have a built-in forgetter and all, but I definitely remember that.
Yeah, and we read this here. We read that there. Yeah, I'm wondering if um they do make an emphasis on how like in the big book how they say the same thing but differently. I wonder if they kind of just repeat themselves in a little bit different way to just kind of reiterate the fact so people have a better understanding. Um we already read all of this. Okay. Well, I'm totally okay with this kind of being the end of the week because I feel like we finished most of that. Um, do you have anything you'd like to
Um,
or talk about from today's meeting?
Absolutely. So I was thinking, how we were talking about belief and knowledge or belief and faith.
Yeah.
There's a third thing for me, and that was hope. So I hoped that this thing would work for me. I didn't really know anybody who'd been in AA that had been sober. I didn't have any belief, I didn't have any faith, but I just hoped it would work. And so that's all I really needed at first to get started. And then once I applied the 12 steps and found that it did work, then I had faith in it. So for me, it was kind of like hope to faith, the jump.
I love that. I had the same experience. Um, I've also found like through going to meetings during my sobriety that, if you're not a message of hope, shut up because, we've already we're already sober. We already worked our steps and stuff, so we need to be that message of hope. Because that's honestly how it started for me too. And the one thing that I got out of this too, when coming to believe, or they say when you like try to find God, when I was listening to the Joe and Charlie tapes, they said, it's not a matter of finding God. God's not lost. It's a matter of seeking God. And those who seek God will find God. And I remember there's something, I think it was on page like 63 or something that says like, he'll provide what we need as long as we keep him close.
Mm.
Um, so like I felt, when I'm not seeking God and God's not in my life before I come into these rooms, I'm not getting what I need. I'm left to my own resources, like they said, and I'm powerless and it doesn't work. But when you come in here and you seek God, you will find him. They said, as a result of these steps, and God will give you what you need if you stay close. And I noticed that with my sobriety, when I stray and I kind of take my power back, that's when my day goes to complete shit. Um, Yesterday I had kind of one of those days, and those are the days where if we take a little pause and, thy will be done, not mine, comes into play, that's giving my power back to God. So it's kind of what I got from this week. Tim, do you want to share on anything? Maybe not. Oh, I don't think his volume thing works or something. All right, so I guess we'll wrap it up for this week. Next week we're on week 7 already. We'll be on chapter 5 and we start how it works for step 3. So we will be here at noon next Tuesday. So thank you guys for attending.
Thank you, Jessica.
Bye.